Hello everyone, and this is lesson 3 in the Introduction to Houdini series. So with this lesson, we'll finally start to make something in Houdini. Okay, so the lesson is broken up into two sections. The first section will just take a look at the general process of how you work within the geometry level. And once you have understood the basic process of how to work at geometry level, then we'll actually make something. And this lesson and the one after this is essentially going to be a single project on how to make an object and then convert it to a digital asset. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so it's a fairly, we're going to make something very simple, but it will cover a fairly important concept in Houdini, which is how to make digital assets. And along the way, we'll take a look at a few other things as well. So to start with, I just want to create a couple of things. I'm going to create an environment light and I'm going to create a ROP network for rendering. Okay, so this is just for show, and we'll take a mantra node. Okay, so that's basically it. Now, here's something important. I won't be using the shelves at all. Mostly I'll be working with the tab menu because like I'm a relatively older user of Houdini. I started with around version 8, and at that point of time it was just the tab menu. So I kind of got used to it, and I think that's probably one of the fastest ways of working. Like once you remember the names of the tools, it's just easier to type them in and bring them in rather than looking for them in the shelf or anything. But there is, beyond the tab and the shelf, there is also a pie menu which has been introduced with version 16. So if you keep C pressed, you will get the pie menu. And it doesn't show up in the network view, it only shows up in the viewport. So again, I don't usually go about using the pie menu. You can use it if you're doing direct modeling, but most of the times when you're just doing node-based stuff, the tab menu for me works better. Okay, but yeah, when we come to some kind of polymodeling, I'll use the pie menu just to get you acquainted with that. Okay, so this is essentially it. So we have a light and we have a render node, and we'll start off by making a simple geometry. Now, the thing is, at scene level, what you have is essentially just an object. And once you come inside the object from trying to connect it to other software, so when you jump in and you'll see like the name here changes to geometry, think of this as a really big modifier stack. Okay, so from a Mac standpoint, this is like your modifier stack, okay, with a lot more options, but that's essentially what it is. So the big difference being, like outside when we connected two objects, like we had done in the first lesson, that is actually linking stuff. Okay, like your parenting objects. But inside, when you link nodes, that is more of you're just attaching one modifier to another. Okay, so the difference being, like in Max or Maya, your modifiers are seen as a list. In Houdini, your modifiers are seen as a nodal structure. Okay, so that's basically the difference. But when we link here, it's essentially just one modifier affecting another modifier. That's essentially what it works with. All right, so once we jump in, to begin with, we'll take a look at the basic, the node looks different. Okay, like if you look at the geometry node here, you only have like two buttons. Okay, like this is for visibility, this is for selection. But once you come inside, you'll see that the node looks different. Because this is technically, as I said, this is a modifier or a tool taken like from that standpoint. So it has more options. So that's the one big difference that you get. Okay, there are a lot of other differences, but that is like one of the primary differences. You'll see that the node design is different. The design is irrelevant because as we had seen, you can have different shapes for different nodes. But yeah, like you'll see that this has like four options here. Okay, and we'll go through that, but just to sort of show you right now. So what we'll do to begin with is I'm just going to make like a couple of objects, and then I'll explain the whole thing. So to begin with, if we press tab, we can come to the primitive menu, and which is sort of like from a Mac standpoint, you have like standard primitives, or from other softwares you have like general objects that you can make. Okay, so this is sort of like that. Okay, and I'll just create a couple of things. So I'll create a box, and I will create, let's create a circle, and let's also create a sphere. So we'll have a sphere, and we'll also create a torus. Now this is just like, if you want to go through the list, or you can just type, like, so just press tab and type torus and you'll get a torus. Okay. Alright, so technically you have 5 different types of geometry. Now, the first thing to understand is that even though I have 5 of them, I can only see one, because the way it works is, it's sort of like, if you look at your modifier stack, you can't see one modifier, or you can't see all the modifiers together. It's sort of like you can only see the effect of, like, whichever level you are on is the effect that you can see. You can't switch on 4 modifiers at the same time. You're basically just, they stack up and they keep affecting each other, and then whichever one you click on is the one that you are watching at that point of time. So this is sort of like that. Okay, so depending on what you want to see is the one that you need to select. So the blue option here is basically visibility in the viewport and render. Okay, which means like that node is what is going to be rendered. Like, even though we have 5 objects in here, okay, when you try to render this, let me add a camera here, and if I try to render this, can I get a smaller view? Just a second, this is too big. Yeah, 640, 480. You'll see that we're only going to get that one box. We're not really going to get anything else. Let's just say render light geometry. Yeah. And then if I come in here and if I change this, so if I come to the box, see, now I can render the box. Or if I come to torus, I can now render the torus. So you can't see them all together. Like, that's a circle and that's a sphere. Okay. So depending on what you click on here is the one that will get rendered. Now within this you have an option, which is, if you keep Control pressed and you click on another object, then you'll see that it says display/render, and it says Control click to set the render flag, Alt click to set display flag. Okay, so let's say like the box is what is visible in the viewport, but if I Control click here, then you'll see that for rendering it shows the sphere, but in the viewport it's showing me the box. So it's sort of like, if you have a very heavy geometry, you don't want to see it in the viewport, you only want to see it for render, then you can just have like a box representing it, and you keep you make that visible, and then you keep Control pressed and click on the other one, and that will render. Okay, so you can do something like that. Let's just, like, if you want, keep Control pressed again here, or sorry, just keep Control pressed and click on the box, so that will go back to this option. So the first question that comes up is that, let's say I want to render all of these. Okay, like all of these objects I want to render. Let me just stop that. So what you need to do is you need to combine them all together. Okay, it's sort of like you're attaching everything together, except that it still remains live, so you can move them around. But it's sort of like if you go to edit poly and you do a merge, like you're merging everything together, and only then can you render all of them if they're all within one single geometry node. Okay, if you're keeping them all in separate geometry nodes, like box has its own geometry node, and torus is in another geometry folder, and circle is in another geometry folder, then they can all render without a problem. But when they're all in here at one level, you will have to merge all of them together. And the way it works is you just press tab and you take merge, and then I can just select all of these and click on the circle and drag a line, and they will all merge into this. Now, if I try to do a render right now, nothing still changes because my display is still kept there. Okay, so I have to change it and bring it to merge, and then kind of everything updates. Now we're having some issues because I think that's a problem with normals. Like you can see it's giving a small problem here, but don't worry about that right now. The point is, like if you want to render all of it together, this is how you do it. Like if I just zoom out a bit, if I select a few of these objects, and I can probably just move them around. Okay, I think it started to cause an issue there. Yeah, let me just try to move these. Yeah, anyway, so you can sort of like, I'm just spreading them out. So that's the first thing to remember. It's essentially what you're seeing is like, if you look from a Mac standpoint or a Maya standpoint, when you're if you have a modifier to attach objects, okay, like usually the way it would work is that you would see a list, right? And then you would have, different objects listed here. Like this is your merge modifier from like a Mac standpoint. So the only difference with Houdini is that you have a merge and these 5 inputs are basically like coming in here and you're seeing them in a visual fashion. So beyond that, there's no real difference between these two. Okay, it's just that you were seeing them as a list and now you're seeing them as, as a nodal structure. Okay, so that's one of your fairly basic things of when you want to see multiple objects together. Now let's just take a look at some of these tools that we have or some of these objects that we have taken. Now there are 2 types of sort of like tools that you will get at geometry level. Like some of them will create some stuff, okay, like the box is actually creating a box. And then if you take a look at something like say polyextrude, or not polyextrude, but like let's say you look at bend, okay, then bend is sort of like deforming geometry. Okay, so some of them modify geometry and some of them actually create geometry, but which is very similar to like any other software. So the point being that what you're seeing here is essentially like these are just boxes that contain data, or these are nodes that contain some kind of data, and then you're using other nodes to just modify that data. Like that is effectively what it is doing. Yeah, I just pressed L to organize them, but I don't think I want to. So starting from the file node. Okay, so the file node is an input node. Okay, like this is default what gets made, but if you can press tab and type file, you'll get like a file node. There's also a file cache, don't take that. You need the basic file node. So the file node is basically a general purpose import node. Okay, it can import a whole bunch of stuff. You can import OBJ files, you can import FBX, you can also import Alembic, but you do get a separate Alembic node as well for importing Alembic. But if you want, you can also import Alembic through the file node. You can also import animated geometry in here. Like if you have an OBJ sequence, you can also import an OBJ sequence in here, but we'll do that later, like not today. So you can click here and you can, find a piece of geometry if you want to import that. Yeah, so if I just, let me look for something. Yeah, so let me just pick this up. So depending on how heavy it is, it'll take that long to load up, but there you go. So we have our basic geometry that's been imported. Okay, I'll just press Shift W to get rid of wireframe. Okay, and you have a whole bunch of options here. You want to load the full geometry, you want to load it as a bounding box. You have like different options here. Like don't worry about this. We'll do all of that later. Yeah, like there are options here, but we're not going to go into this at the moment. Okay, we'll just keep it to all geometry. Okay, so with this particular node, there are like the basic options you get around here. These will be fixed for any node. So let me just try and explain what what this does. Okay, so let me do one thing. Just to show you, I'm going to do a save, and I'm going to save it on the desktop as file. Okay, so as we saw, the first node is for visibility. Okay, so if I keep it on the box, okay, so currently we're seeing the box. Okay, the second node, which is like the pink option, is called template. Okay, which is, this is visible, but I just want to see another object in like a ghost mode. Then of course, if you select this, it will still try and show you, but like let's come here because that one is too heavy. But if I click here on, not on the blue, on the pink, you'll see that it just shows like a wireframe representation. So you get, it's just like a, it's just to help you out of what this other node is. It won't get rendered, like the rendering will still happen with the box only, but this is just for like template mode for you to see what that other node contains. You can do it with multiple, like if I also shift click on the torus, see, you can see like all of them. You can't shift click, you can't shift click on the first one, but the template option you can shift click and see multiple. Okay, so on the right side you have red and yellow. Okay, so the red is primarily for locking the node, and the yellow is to bypass the node. So as we had seen in the last lesson, you can, like if you have 4 modifiers or 4 nodes and you want to bypass one of them, you can click here. So this will bypass it. Okay, see, so that turns off. Okay, that will turn off the node. Now what does locking do? Okay, now this is where this is why I saved the file. Okay, so let's just take a look at this file. Okay, so if I come to desktop and then that's my file. So if I right click here and if I come to properties, then you'll see this is 244 KB. Even though you have this, this little guy in here which looks very heavy. Okay, so Houdini in a lot of ways works a bit like a compositing software. It's like when you import geometry inside, it doesn't keep it within the file. It is still sort of streaming it from the hard disk. So the file that you have imported here, like this fairly heavy Buddha statue, is not really being saved in the file. Okay, this is still being sourced from the hard disk. However, if you want to actually store it within the file, okay, you can lock it and then it will get stored within the file itself. The advantage of that is that when you want to send this file to somebody else and you don't want to send like the OBJ file with it, then you can just lock this particular node. It'll increase the size of the file, but then they won't have to worry about it. Because it's sort of like when you're working in a compositing software, if you just send the project without the footage, the project won't work. It's the same thing, right? You need to send the geometry along with the Houdini file. So that's something to remember. But yeah, if I lock this, like you can click there and that will lock it. And now if I save it again, and now if you check this and do properties, that's 18.9 MB. Okay, because it's actually storing the full geometry within the Houdini file. So usually you don't need to do this unless you specifically want to lock a particular operation that you have done and not worry about it. Like you can sometimes do operations which take a really long time to calculate. So you can let it calculate and just lock it. And like, I'm not going to worry about this ever again. So, it works for those things because now all of that data is being stored here. So I'll just unlock it. Like just click that again and you can say this operation will discard lock changes. You say okay, and that will unlock. It'll take a second, but yeah. So now if I save this and come back here, you'll see that it's back to 244 KB. Okay, now, so those are the 4 options that you get. Now, let's take a look at this final thing called the I over here, which is for info. So if you click on info, then this is something interesting. I'll just, you can click here to pin it. Yeah, because what happens is if you click outside, it goes away. So if you want to see it permanently, you can click the plus and that will show it to you. So what, this is essentially like information about this node, okay, which basically shows you the number of points it has, the number of polygons it has, and then if it has any attributes, which we'll talk about later, not at the moment. And it also shows you how much memory this is consuming. So it's consuming 58.49 MB. Okay. And then when was it created and modified? So it's a pretty nice little detail that you get. You also have options for like, the center of it, the basic bounding box size of it. Okay, so you get some pretty decent options. You can also add a comment, like if I just do, and like if I click outside, see now it shows you like, it shows you like this has a comment. So if I say show comment in network, see it shows you the comment. So if you've created a specific operation, or let's say you have a node in which you've typed in some code and you want to explain that, then you can sort of type it here. And so when somebody comes and switches on the operation, then you can sort of see that. The other way to see this is you can middle click. Okay, so if you middle click on a node, you will get, the same I menu, but that just goes away the minute you sort of leave the middle click. So if you want to permanently see it, press this and that will permanently show it. If you want to just temporarily see it, middle click, and then you can see it. Okay, so that is as far as the general parameters are concerned. Now let's take a look at, we'll just take a look at the box and then we'll start making something. Okay, because the other parameters you can check out. Like if you have any issues, you can ask me, but more or less they're the same. Okay. Okay, so one of the interesting things within Houdini, or let's take a look at the sphere because that will give us a little more options, is like within Maya you have different shells for different things, right? So you have a polygonal sphere, and then you also have a subdivision sphere, and then you have a NURB sphere. What Houdini does is all of this is within a single node. Okay, so if you click on the primitive type, you get different varieties of spheres. So you can have a polygon. Let me just bring up the wireframe. That is Shift W in case you have forgotten. So we can see polygon, we can see polygon mesh, you can see mesh, you can see NURBS. Okay, so you can see polygon soup, which is a internal Houdini type. You have the radius, you have center, you have uniform scale, you have frequency, which is number of segments. Now, final thing over here, which is a little interesting, is if you want to change a particular value without modifying the slider, you can middle click on any value. And what you get is this very nice little thing called a numeric ladder. And then if you middle click, and you can go to, and you can do like very fine increments. So if you want to do like 0.001, see, we can do that. You want to do 0.01, or 0.1 or 1. So whichever one you want, you can like just do very minor adjustments. If it's an integer, it will only give you 1 to like 1, 10 and 100. So if I just want to like, really increase it, like just jump by 100 straight up. Okay, so you can do stuff like that. Okay, you can also modify 3 values simultaneously. So if you take the radius and just increase it, see, it's affecting all of them simultaneously. Okay, so that's the basic of the primitives that you get and the general way in which the nodes work. So let me get rid of that. Now let's take a look at some basic operations. So let's say if I just want to move, rotate, modify some objects. Okay, so let's say if I want to do something like that. So let's start with a box. Yeah. Okay. And then let's say I want to move it now, or I want to rotate it. Okay, so if you select it, you will get an option to basically just move it around. But what that is technically doing is it's actually moving the center of the object. So you don't want to do that. So what you would normally want to do is you want to take like a move operation and then move it accordingly. In a way, this is very similar to even like a few node-based compositing softwares. Like if you're used to Nuke or Fusion, then you are kind of used to working this way. Where to move you have a node and to rotate you have a node. Like you have a transform node. So stuff like that. So that's roughly what you're doing here. So in order to move an object, you take a transform node. Okay, so we can take a transform. And okay, so this thing is new. This little arrow that you're getting here, this is new to 16.5. Like this wasn't there before. Okay, like this, it's showing you like you need an input over here. So click here. You don't need to click and drag. Just click on that circle. You'll see a line sort of, attaching to the mouse, and then just leave it there. And there you go. Now if you come to the transform, okay, and now you have basic options for move, rotate, scale. So now you're technically building a modifier stack. Okay, so you had the box first, and then we have a move. Okay, so I can just take this, I can move it around. So let's say I'll move it here and maybe rotate it a bit. Now if I take another transform, okay, so now what you're doing is like the first transform moved it to the side. The second transform, again, the pivot is at 0. So if I want to just rotate it this way, I can rotate it that way. See, you're seeing the display here and you're seeing a template there. So it's showing you what operation happened before and what operation is happening now. So what you've done is you had your original box, okay, and then you moved it, and then you moved it again. Now, the interesting thing that happens with Houdini is technically this is not really an object. Like think of this just as a node that contains data, like as I had said before. And what you can do is you can actually merge even this kind of data together. Okay, so you don't, like what we had before was we had 5 independent nodes and then we sort of merged them together. You can actually merge these guys together. Okay, so if I take a merge, and then if I take transform 1, transform 2 and the box, and what you've done technically is you have 3 boxes. Okay, like you have the first box here, okay, which is connected to that, and then you have another box here, which is, you can rotate around. So what you've done is you are actually like seeing all three operations that you had done to the box as a single entity, which you can render. So you had one box and then you made it into three boxes. Okay, because each one of these is just data, and then you can like merge all the data together and get one larger structure. But they're all still flowing out of the same box. So if I make any changes here, you'll see like all three will change. Like if I come to polygon mesh, which will add divisions, then if I want to add divisions, you can see like they're adding to all of them. If you don't want them to add to one of them, you'll have to have a completely different box node, and that will have to flow into it, or you'll have to work something else out. But by default, the point of working with Houdini is this, okay, is that you want everything to flow in from a central area, so that when I make changes to that one structure, like everything changes on its own. So like, let's say if I get rid of this, and let's say I have this basic box, and then I'm going to take a transform, and I will press E for scale, and I will scale this, and then I'll take another transform. Let's do one thing. Let's move it to one side. Yeah, and then I have this transform, and let's do one thing. Let's press E. Okay, and then we will squash it, and I will move it to one side over there. And so if I merge these together, and they can be merged in any order, like it's not necessary for them to merge, because it can go crisscross as well. That's not a problem. So there you go. So now you have like, they're all technically flowing, as I said, they're all technically flowing from the same thing. But what you have are like three different boxes out of the same box, which again, if I make any changes to this original box, you'll see like they're still connected over there. So see, the nice thing about having a node system like this is technically what you're doing is like instancing and referencing from a Mac standpoint. I tend to give a lot of Macs references because I started from Macs. So, that's why I give a lot of Macs references. But the point is that in Macs, when you do instances, you don't really have any visual way of figuring out what is an instance. Like, I think Macs has a nodal representation. I had used it a long time back. I don't know how good it wasn't very good back then. But most people don't. Like, I don't think most people even know that there is a sort of a nodal view within Macs. But the point is, like, here, if you think of this as an instance, then you actually know exactly where it is coming from. Like, you can very easily make out like, okay, this is the same, this box is flowing into these two. So if I make changes here, these will get affected. So it's very easy to figure out those things. Okay. So, and let's say like if I want to maybe animate this guy without having to affect these two, I can actually attach nodes in the middle. So if I take a transform here and I can just drop it in the middle, you'll see like it sort of connects here. So now this is independent of those two. And let's say if I just keep Alt pressed and I'll click on the Y axis, that will add a keyframe. And then I'll come a little ahead and I'll come up like that. Switch on this button. Okay, like this little arrow down here. This is the auto key. So then if I move ahead and make changes, it'll automatically generate keyframes. Otherwise, for every change, you'll have to do an Alt click. So what you've done now is you have those guys not animating, and you have like this one guy animating. But if I make some changes, oh, okay, as you can see, like, oh, these are new changes to 16.5. This is the first time I'm working in 16.5. But yeah, like when it's animated, it's showing you this nice little, like an animation icon over there. But what I can do is, let's say if I plug this in here, now everything will animate. See, because instead of the static box coming into these two, you just have this little object coming into those two. And I can still again go back and, make those changes. So that animation will go away. And because again, the nice thing is like replace this and everything will get replaced. So if I take a torus instead of this and I fill in the torus in all three, see. Because what's happening is like these are like these, as we said, like these don't really care about what input is coming in. These are just like, it just says that, okay, whatever input comes in, I'm going to translate it by -2 and then scale it to this value. Okay, so whatever input you throw in, it's going to do that. So it just, it's completely independent of any particular geometry that comes in. If you want to remove a specific merge out of this, like maybe I don't want that one or this one, you can keep Y pressed and remove that. Okay, so you can do that, or you can keep Y pressed and remove all of them. That will work as well. Or if you select the merge, then you'll see the names over here. So there's transform 1, transform 2, transform 3. Let's say I don't want transform 3, then I can click there and see that will remove transform 3. So now your animation stuff is gone. Okay, so this has been a fairly sort of a vague lesson, because what I wanted to cover was just how to work with the nodes at geometry level. So this is part 1 of this lesson. So in the second part, we'll actually make something, and we'll take a look at how to make it first in a fairly standard way, and then how to make it procedurally.